Chapter 27. Rash got up from his seat on the fold-out bed. He couldn't keep still. This had been a recurring problem for some time. He just got so fucking bored, sitting here in this midtown apartment with these goddamn G-men. He'd been held prisoner here for days, without so much as a change of clothing. They'd given him a white terry cloth bathrobe to wear when he wanted his clothes washed, and every couple of days one of the three made a run to the laundromat. Meals were all takeout. The kitchen was dark and empty. Which of the three went to pick it up varied, but it was always just one who went out, whatever the errand. There were always two of them there guarding Rash. They'd given him their names as Smith, Jones and Miller. They hadn't even smiled when they'd said it. At least Rash didn't have to share the bedroom with them. They slept out here on the folded-out couch, never more than two at a time, taking turns sitting up on watch. There was a phone, but they didn't let Rash use it, and when he sneaked out of the bedroom one night at 2 a.m, when the on-watch agent was in the can, and tried it, he couldn't get a dial tone. Watching the feds the next day, he saw that they were punching in a 4-digit code before dialing, and that code changed with every call. Rash wasn't a cryptographer, and they didn't like him watching when they dialed, so he couldn't crack the code. There was a TV, but the reception was so bad even Rash wasn't desperate enough to watch it, especially because it was a constant reminder of why the reception was so bad. Those goddamn ships were still out there, cruising over the city. The helmet, or mask, or whatever it was, sat on the same desk as the trick phone. That was another reminder. Rash didn't know for sure why they hadn't turned it over to their scientists, but so far they hadn't. They kept it right there, which seemed stupid. He'd asked about it, but for days they wouldn't give him an answer. Finally one of them said, "It stays with you until Phillips gets back. You had it when we found you, so it's part of the package." That was just stupid enough that Rash figured it was probably true, but it opened up a slew of other questions, like where the hell was Phillips, and when would he be back? Naturally, they wouldn't tell him that. They wouldn't answer any of the important questions. If he asked how long they were going to keep him, they just said, "Until we're told to let you go." And that was one of the more responsive answers. Still, it was pretty clear what was going on here. They wanted to make damn sure that Rash didn't tell anyone about the ships, which meant they knew about the ships, had known all along, just as he had thought. And Schaefer was tangled up in all of it, though Rash didn't know how. It was more than just that he'd gone after the killer and come away with the mask, Rash was sure. And the whole thing might be more complicated than he had thought. Those spaceships out there, that didn't look like any mere hunting party, but if it was an invasion fleet, why weren't they taking out whole neighborhoods, instead of slaughtering individuals or small groups and then leaving? Was that thing Schaefer had fought an escaped criminal the aliens were hunting, perhaps? Or did the ships belong to some other species entirely? A different one from the hunter? If so, who was on which side? Were the ships friend or foe? And what was the government's relationships with those aliens, with the killer? And what the hell had happened to Schaefer? Was he still off in Central America somewhere, or had he come home? Was he sitting in some apartment somewhere with a bunch of federal agents, eating bad Chinese takeout because these dweebs were too lazy to hike down to Mott Street for the good stuff? Rash doubted a mere 3 agents would be enough to hold Schaefer. They probably had a dozen guarding him. Rash frowned at that. He wasn't as young as Schaefer, and he'd never been as big as Schaefer. He'd never had Schaefer's insane ability to handle violence. But he wasn't a wimp. He'd taken on tough guys in the past. "This sucks," he said. Miller was out getting lunch. Smith was leaning by the door, while Jones had a batch of papers spread out on the desk. "This really sucks," Rash said. "How long do you think you can keep me here?" "As long as we have to," Smith replied without moving. Jones didn't even look up. As far as Rash could tell, he was so involved in his paperwork, whatever it was, that he hadn't heard. And the chain lock and deadbolt weren't locked, since they didn't want to make things harder for Miller. Maybe, after all these long, boring days, these guys were getting sloppy. "Hey, Smith," Rash said. "Your shoes untied." "Get serious, Rash," Smith replied. He didn't look down, didn't unfold his arms. "We're trained professionals. That ruse only works on Cub Scouts." Rash glared at him, then turned away in disgust. He marched over to the desk and glowered over Jones's shoulder at the papers. "What the hell is this anyway?" he asked. "Doing your homework?" "Doing my taxes," Jones replied without looking up. "In August. I missed the deadline and I got an extension. Okay, Rash?" Jones put down his pencil and glared up at the detective. "Oh, great," Rash growled. "I'm stuck here with a fucking accountant." "Hey," Jones said angrily, pushing his chair back. "I don't like this, you know. I don't like this assignment. I don't like you, and I don't like doing my goddamn tax returns. But I can't afford a fancy accountant. I was busy on a real case in April, and I've got some investments, so I can't use the short form, okay? You got a problem with any of that, Rash?" "Well, jeepers, you're a regular Elliot Ness," Rash began. "Lay off, Rash," Smith said, standing up straight. The phone rang. Rash started at the sound. This was the first time it had rung since he'd been brought here. Jones snatched up the receiver and listened. Rash tried to listen too, but Smith wasn't having it. "You just watch that mouth of yours, Detective Rash," Smith said. "We've been trying to make this easy, but we can give you a hard time, if we have to. You give us any grief, maybe when this is over, you'll find the IRS taking a look at your taxes. They'll audit you and have you hunting receipts and check stubs back to your goddamn paper route." "Suburban boy, aren't you?" Rash growled. "I never had a fucking paper route." Jones hung up the phone and announced, "That was Peterson. Schaefer's due in 6 hours. They'll chopper him straight to the MetLife building and make delivery there." "Whoa, wait a minute," Rash demanded, interrupting. "What do you mean, delivery?" Jones didn't answer. Neither did Smith. They both just stared silently at Rash. And Rash put it together. That gadget on Schaefer's neck, the invisible spaceships cruising over the streets, General Phillips telling them to just stay out of the whole thing, Schaefer's brother disappearing 8 years ago. He didn't understand all of it. There were pieces that didn't fit, yet. But that delivery... "Jesus," he said. "You're going to give Schaefer to those aliens, aren't you?" Smith and Jones didn't deny it, and Rash's temper snapped. "You lousy bastards," he began. Smith pulled his pistol and shoved it under Rash's nose. "Back off," he bellowed. "One more move and I'll cuff you to the damn toilet." Rash backed off. He backed over to the sofa bed and sat down. Yeah, he said, trying to sound harmless. He could feel his heart hammering with fury, but he kept his voice down. "Look, I'm sorry. I'm just a little tense. After all that's happened, waiting here and everything. You have to understand, Schaefer's a friend of mine." Smith stared at him for a moment, then relaxed and holstered his automatic. "Sure," he said. "No problem. 6 more hours and it'll be over, and you can go home to the wife and kids." "Yeah," Rash said. "Thanks." He wondered whether the wife and kids had come home yet. Were they still up in Elmira, or had they come back and found him gone? Shari must be panicking, not hearing from him for so long. Had anyone thought to tell her what was going on? Or at least, tell her a comforting lie of some kind? The bastards probably hadn't bothered. That pumped his anger up further, but he refused to let it show. He sat for a long moment, letting the tension clear from the air, letting Smith and Jones relax, letting them think he had relaxed. Then he stood up again, as restless as ever. He wandered to the window and looked out. He knew where he was, of course. If he could see the street, he could tell where he was, just about anywhere in Manhattan, and this one was easy. The Lexington Avenue subway was only a block away, if he could get out of the apartment and the building. He wandered away again, back towards the desk. Smith was back by the door, not moving, his pistol tucked away. Jones was back at his tax forms. Miller was still gone, taking his own sweet time at the deli. Rash leaned over Jones's shoulder, feigning friendly curiosity. "Hey," he said, "isn't 2 plus 5 7 instead of 8? "What?" Jones looked where Rash pointed, startled, and Rash's other hand grabbed the back of Jones's head and slammed his face down onto the desk, hard. Rash heard the distinctive crunch of a nose breaking. Taking a page from his partner's book, Rash snatched up the alien mask from the desk and smashed it down on the phone, shattering plastic and circuitry. That would slow these two down when they tried to call in. Then he flung the mask sidearm at Smith. Smith instinctively warded it off, costing himself a second or so in his attempt to reach for his automatic. Then Rash launched himself at Smith, slamming the G-Man up against the wall. Charged with adrenaline, Rash picked Smith up completely and rammed him headfirst through the door. Wood splintered and a hole opened, giving Rash a view of the hall's wallpaper. Smith went limp. "That's what you get for insulting the Cub Scouts, you son of a bitch," he said, dropping the G-Man. "My younger son's a wolf." He snatched up the mask with one hand, yanked out Smith's pistol with the other, then smashed his way through the broken remnants of the door. "Shoddy modern construction," he said. "If you'd picked the Dakota for your hideaway, I couldn't have done that." Then he ran for the stairs. "MetLife building, 6 o'clock, he said, as he heard Smith moaning and Jones cursing behind him. He took a final look back in time to see Jones step into the hallway, clutching his nose as blood streamed down his face, his 9mm in his other hand. Jones got one shot off before Rash was safely through the fire door and down the stairs, but it wasn't even close. It chipped plaster from the ceiling. Rash knew he might not have a chance. Those two could call in the whole federal government, if he'd taken the time to tie them up or something. But Miller could be back any time. That was why Rash had taken the stairs instead of the elevator. His only chance was that they might not expect him to do anything other than run and hide, and might not bother coming after him. Searching for a rogue cop in New York would be hard to keep quiet, and these guys desperately wanted to keep whatever they were doing a secret. They might just let him go. After all, they needed only another 6 hours, and it would all be over.